Good evening and welcome back to SF Commons. We are delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Robert Epstein to discuss the extent and the power of Google and Facebook to manipulate and to impact election results. The 2020 presidential election is upon us.
I am indeed Dr. Robert Epstein. The most important thing for you to know about me is that I'm the father of 5 wonderful children. As it happens, I'm also a research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. I value my country and democracy more than I value any party or candidate. That is why I'm speaking out today. I'm here to explain why Google poses a serious threat to democracy, how monitoring systems can protect us from companies like Google, and how Congress can immediately end Google's worldwide monopoly on search. My plan for ending that monopoly was published just yesterday in Business Week. I respectfully request that my article be entered into the congressional record. It's attached to my full testimony. Research psychologist for nearly 40 years. My PhD is from Harvard, and since 1981, I've published extensively on AI and other topics. Some of my research has focused on Google, on the company's massive surveillance operations, censorship capabilities, and unprecedented ability to manipulate the thinking of 2.5 billion people, soon to be 4+ billion.
Good evening, Dr. Epstein. Welcome.
Thank you.
In July of this year, you testified before the United States Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and made a statement. And you said you're there to explain why Google presents a serious threat to democracy and human autonomy.
Yes, for more than 6.5 years now, I've been running controlled experiments that have uncovered new forms of influence that the internet has made possible. Uh, some of these new types of influence are in the hands of Google. Some are in the hands of some other companies. But Google, in fact, controls most of these new forms of influence. They're extremely powerful. Uh, they're largely invisible to people, and they give Google the power to shift people's opinions, shift people's votes, especially if they're undecided on some issue, uh, without people knowing and without leaving a paper trail. So Google and the other tech companies in 2020, for example, could shift as many as 15 million votes toward one presidential candidate or the other. In 2016, we found pro Hillary Clinton bias in all 10 search positions on the first page of Google search results, but not on Bing or Yahoo. So I'm not saying that Google did anything deliberately. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we found that bias. We measured that bias based on a tremendous amount of data that we collected. And I'm saying that we know from the experimental research I've been doing for a long time that that bias was sufficient to have shifted a lot of votes over time among undecided voters toward Hillary Clinton. 2.6 and 10.4 million votes. And again, that's just 2016. And found that, again, there was liberal bias on Google, but not on Bing or Yahoo. That liberal bias, if it had been present nationwide, and if the level of bias that we found in 2018 had been present around the country, that it would have shifted to Democrats as many as 78.2 million votes.
That's a lot of
Without,
votes.
yes, without anyone knowing. And without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace. In 2018, they used uh, another kind of manipulation that I've also studied and have quantified. And what they did on that day was they replaced the word Google on their homepage. They replaced that with the words "Go vote." Assuming they sent it to everyone, First of all, I should point out people were praising Google that day, saying, "Isn't that great? What a great public service. Google's trying to get people to vote." That's not what Google was doing. This was a vote manipulation, a very, very strong vote manipulation, because Google knows that a lot more Democrats and left-leaning people see that message that day than Republicans. And in fact, I calculated, and I published an article on this, I calculated that one vote manipulation, the go vote prompt,
Huh.
would have given at least 800,000 more votes to Democrats than to Republicans that day. And Google knows this. They would have done the same calculations I did. Now, that's assuming that they sent that reminder to everyone. If they sent that reminder mainly to Democrats and
Hmm.
left-leaning people, well, then obviously the difference would have been greater. Google controls a 92% of search around the world, not just in the United States. The next largest search engine, which is Bing, uh, in fact draws only about a 2.5%. Search suggestions and search results are ephemeral, meaning they're generated on the fly, right?
Hmm.
Just for us. And then when we click again, they disappear and they're gone forever. They're not stored anywhere. And
Huh.
no one can go back in time and figure out what it was we were shown. We can't go back in time, and authorities can't go back in time. Now, what my experiments show beyond any doubt at all, is that these ephemeral experiences have an enormous impact on the thinking and behavior of people who are undecided on some issue.
Right.
And I've measured that very carefully now for almost 7 years in many controlled experiments I've published in peer reviewed journals. There is simply no question that these ephemeral experiences affect thinking and behavior profoundly. Ephemeral experiences, that is from an email that was leaked Wall Street Journal in 2018. It was a Google email in which one employee was saying to other employees, "How can we use ephemeral experiences to change people's views about Trump's travel ban?" In other words, employees and executives at Google, they know and they use that power. And there have been many leaks from Google in the past 2 years or so. One of them was a PowerPoint presentation called, and I'm not kidding, it's actually called "The Good Censor,"
Uh huh.
and it's literally a presentation given within Google about how we censor, but we're good censors. You know, we do things in a way that reflects our values. So
Yeah.
that means we're good censors. Well, of course, the big question is, why should any private company that's not accountable to the public,
Right.
not accountable to the public in the United States, not
Right.
accountable to the public anywhere in the world, why should a private company decide what billions of people around the world
Think.
see or don't see?
Right.
That's the problem. Now, sometimes we know they're censoring because they actually shut down a channel on YouTube. But
Right.
most of the time, we don't know when they're censoring, because when they're censoring, they're holding back content, they're holding back information. There's no way for us to know that they're holding it back because we don't see it.
Right.
You don't know what you don't know. So Google is the biggest censor in the history of humankind. I published a long article about this in US News and World Report in 2016. It was called "The New Censorship." In that article, I talked about 9 different blacklists that I knew were being maintained at the company. Now, I had never seen any of these blacklists, but I knew that they were there because I've been programming computers since I was a teenager. So I knew
Right.
they had these blacklists. And this was quite a lengthy article, and it explains how they use blacklists for censorship purposes. Now, just a few months ago, so this is 2019, just a few months ago, uh, a whistleblower came forward. His name is Zachary Voorhees. And he came forward and he said, Google has blacklists, 900 pages of documents from Google, and among those documents were 2 blacklists, Two
Right.
actual blacklists now have been leaked from the company. Now, uh, you mentioned a little earlier that I testified before Congress
Right.
in July, which I did. Well, right before I testified, Google's representative also testified, and he was asked by a senator, I believe it was Senator Hawley,
Uh huh.
uh, Google have blacklists. And this representative from Google said under oath, no. Now, that was, of course, an absolute lie.
Yeah.
Here's a man committing perjury. And we're learning more and more from the leaks, from the whistleblowers. We're learning more and more about the truth about this company. And it is extremely frightening because not only does this company have multiple blacklists, possibly dozens of them, but we know from a recent leak that Google not only has blacklists, Google also changes the ranking of search results any old way they choose. D-rank, which means they push some content down into lower search positions. They have the ability to shift people's thinking, beliefs, attitudes around the world. They can get us to do things and think things, and the algorithms are written by people. And
Exactly.
the biases of the programmers are reflected in the algorithms, and that's been shown in other people's research, not my own research. You know, could a company like Google actually be interested uh, in engineering humanity? Well,
Why not?
unfortunately, the answer
Yeah.
is yes. How do we know? Because of another leak. One of the leaks from Google about a year and a half ago was a video, an 8-minute video called The Selfish Ledger.
Huh.
And that video was not meant to be released to the public. It was leaked by someone. And that video actually explains to people working at Google about the power that Google has to re-engineer humanity.
The founder of Google is in the Pentagon Advisory Board with Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, Amazon. Tulsi Gabbard is really against war. And she's got a $50 million lawsuit against Google. She mentioned your articles, your work.
Yes, of course. First of all, number one, Google has a very strong relationship with not just with the American government, but with other governments around the world. Google has a very strong relationship with government agencies, with our intelligence agencies. Now, regarding Tulsi Gabbard, if you looked on Google and looked at what's called Google Trends, which gives you statistics about searches, there was a tremendous amount of traffic
Right,
going to Tulsi Gabbard.
right.
But Google, right after the debate ended, shut down her advertising account.
But
Uh,
why did they do that?
well, Google does this all the time. This is what I explain in my article in U.S. News and World Report. Google, every single day, shuts down websites, access to websites, shuts down Gmail accounts, shuts down YouTube accounts. You know, Google is the biggest censor that has ever explained why they did what they did, and they have no customer service department. Google shut down Tulsi Gabbard's advertising account, which might have brought her in, during those critical hours, tens of millions of donations,
Right.
and Google shut down her account, I think, for about 6 hours. There has never, in my opinion, been a company more arrogant ever than uh, than Google. Possibly, if you look back in history, maybe at companies like Standard Oil, which eventually was broken up by the U.S. government. Uh, and there are a lot of members of Congress now, both Republicans and Democrats, who are starting to talk about breaking up companies like Google and Facebook. The attorneys general from 48 states and 2 U.S. territories, so that's 50 attorneys general altogether, started a very extensive antitrust investigation. California did not join in with this antitrust action against Google, and we have learned recently that this is probably because the Attorney General of California, whose name is Becerra, that that one of his largest donors, Google, and based in California. So Becerra is trying to protect Google, but talking about 50 other attorneys general now who have united in an action against Google. Also, U.S. Congress, specifically the House Judiciary Committee, has just subpoenaed documents and emails from Google and other big tech companies, and they're specifically trying to get email communications
Mm-hmm.
among top executives at these companies. So Congress now is going after Google and Facebook and some other companies. Since 2017, the European Union has fined Google now the equivalent of about $10 billion. And that's in four different fines.
Well, Facebook has been just fined $5 billion, right?
Yes, Facebook was just fined for that
And
was by the Federal Trade Commission. So yes, more and more is happening. Government agencies here and in other parts of the world are going after these companies. The internet, when it was created, it was supposed to be the great leveler. It was supposed to make
right,
us all more equal, and to prevent special interests, to prevent big companies from running our lives. Uh, that did not happen. In fact, quite the opposite happened. So now the entire world uh, is the, in the entire world, the internet is dominated uh, by two companies, by Google and Facebook. They should not allow the internet to be dominated uh, by private companies, companies which are not accountable to the public, to any public. And by the way, Google knows that perhaps their future is not so bright. Uh,
mm-hmm.
how do I know that? Because uh, Google has gone through very quietly, very secretly, two corporate reorganizations within the last few years.
Okay,
And I've talked to top experts, legal experts here and in Europe to try to understand the nature of these reorganizations. And these reorganizations, what they're doing is they're trying to protect the stock of the major shareholders of Google in case Google, the search engine, is subjected to some sort of uh, uh, legal control by government.
how are they doing this?
Well, they've done this by changing Google from a corporation. It used to be Google Inc. into an
Oh,
LLC,
I see. So
and
limited liability corporation. Okay.
and Google is no longer independent. There's now a holding company called Alphabet. And there's a second holding company called 26, and these holding companies actually now own smaller entities. So Google is now owned by a holding company.
I'm trying to conceptualize how this antitrust would work. How would the government come in based on antitrust, effectively, break up Google and Facebook? What do you think?
There are many possibilities. Merely breaking them up would not really solve the problems. So
Uh-huh.
if you made Google, sell YouTube, that would just make the uh, the stockholders of of Google much richer. They would just get much richer. It's true that they couldn't control what happens on YouTube
Right.
from that point on, but I'll bet you a lot of the people working at YouTube would be the same people, and they would do the same things.
Right.
So really breaking up uh, Google wouldn't make much difference given the threats that Google
Right.
poses. The same is true that if Facebook had to spin off Instagram or WhatsApp,
Yeah.
not make much difference
Right.
at all. It's just that the Mark Zuckerberg would get a lot richer. I published an article in Bloomberg Business Week in which I explained a very simple method that could be used under antitrust law
Uh-huh.
to end Google's worldwide monopoly on search, to
Okay.
end that monopoly quickly and permanently. And the method for doing that is to make what's called their index, to make their index public. And in fact, you would have a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation
Yeah.
in the area of search. That's how you do it. If you simply make their index public, uh, if they did it voluntarily or if they were forced to do so by the government, then their monopoly on search would end. Is there any precedent for this? Well, the
Right.
answer is yes. In 1956, uh, our government AT&T, which had a monopoly on telecommunications in the United States, they forced AT&T to share all of the company's patents with everybody for
Huh.
free. This is called the 1956 Consent Decree between AT&T and T and the Department of Justice. And so the point is that uh, dramatically, of course, reduced the power that AT&T had. It reduced the size of its monopoly to some extent. But more importantly, it created tremendous innovation in electronics and telecommunications around the world. If Google's database is made public, it will have the same effect.
If Google wants to oppose that, what would they argue?
Well, Google might want to do this voluntarily. I even said this in my article
Okay.
because they realize that there's so many legal actions against them right now that maybe they should cooperate a little bit. And it's possible they might run the numbers and they might decide that that's smart for them to do. Uh, that maybe they should try to become a more traditional company and sell actual products
Right.
uh, instead of selling us to advertisers, which is what they do now. So for Google, we are the product. And that business model, in my opinion, should be made illegal. Facebook and Google, we are the product. Facebook adopted this method of business that Google invented. It's called the surveillance business model. And Facebook adopted that same model because they couldn't find any other way to make money. One company that seems to be an exception here is Apple, because at the moment, the head of Apple, Tim Cook, he has said publicly that he thinks that this surveillance business model of doing business is creepy. Where on the surface we think we're getting free services from companies like Google and Facebook. Actually, they're not free at all. We pay for them with our freedom. And more, the government doesn't have to get any kind of court order to do surveillance because they can just get the data directly from companies like Google and Facebook. How do we know this is true? We know this from Edward Snowden. The government doesn't have the resources to engage in surveillance
Right.
on the scale that Google and Facebook do. With Facebook, people give the information voluntarily. With
Right.
Google, there's more trickery involved, I would say, because when you're conducting a search, for example, in the Google search engine, or you're writing a Gmail, you feel like everything is private. You don't realize that it's literally being stolen from you. On Facebook,
Mm.
the information so everyone can see it, and you understand that.
Right.
With Google, you don't understand. People do not understand that every single time they do anything using a Google product, such as Google Maps, for example, that they are being surveilled. They get the information direct from Google and Facebook, and that was shown, that was proven without doubt by the Edward Snowden leak.
Are
So,
there governmental agencies who are directly tied into these two organizations in a way within their corporate structure?
well, there are many ways in which Google and Facebook and other companies cooperate with federal agencies. I've also written about this in several of my own articles.
Right.
So, for example, I have an article called "The New Mind Control." Talk about the relationship uh, between Google and our government intelligence agencies. And again, the more you learn about these things, I guarantee you, the more concerned you will be, the more disturbed you will be. I do not believe that we should allow these companies in 2020 to
Right.
shift votes and opinions, because if they all work together, if they all support the same candidate, they can shift 15 million votes. Well, the people that they can affect most easily are the undecided voters. But
Right. Okay.
see, 6 months before the election, usually about 20% of the voting population is undecided. In this case, we're talking about 30 million people.
Right.
What I'm saying is that these companies, if they work together, they can shift 15 million of those undecided voters
Yeah.
toward one candidate with no one knowing that they're doing this.
How would you stop these companies from
Well, the way to
interfering?
stop them, in my opinion, is to take the kind of monitoring systems that I built in 2016 and
Uh
2018
huh.
and build a much larger and more comprehensive monitoring system, one that that would involve, thousands of people we call field agents in
Okay.
all 50 states. One that would record and capture all kinds of ephemeral experiences, not just search results, but capture news feeds, which can be biased, uh, keep track of shadow banning, suppression of videos, keep track of suppression of emails, uh,
Mm-hmm.
track of many, many different kinds of things. Targeted messaging, we would be able to track that very precisely. That's the kind of messaging maybe that goes out just to Democrats, but not to Republicans. And again, if you don't have a monitoring system in place, you cannot preserve any of these manipulations because, again, almost all of these techniques involve ephemeral experiences set up by a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Google and Facebook in particular, 95% of their donations go to Democrats.
Oh, I see.
In 2016, Hillary Clinton's chief technology officer was a woman named Stephanie Hannon.
Mm-hmm.
Up to her straight from Google. She was a Google executive.
Oh, I see.
Eric Schmidt, at that time the head of Google, offered in writing to run Hillary Clinton's tech campaign. And guess who Hillary Clinton's largest donor was in 2016?
Google.
Google. She attacked me personally. She said my
I
work
saw
was
that.
based on, quote, 21 undecided voters. That's absolutely false. My work is based on rigorous research with tens of
And
thousands of people covering, 5 national elections in 4 countries.
right.
And the problem, though, is that her tweet, which went to her 25 million followers, the problem is that generated over the next day or two hundreds of articles, including articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Vanity Fair, CNN, hundreds of articles basically repeating what she said and basically, amplifying her message. If I had found in 2016 that Google search results favored Donald Trump, I would have announced that. Even with all this recent negative media coverage, I'm not going to stop to learn about online influence and how it affects people, and I will continue to try to set up larger and more sophisticated monitoring systems
Right.
because I believe that that law and regulation can never really protect us from tech companies because
Right.
law and regulation move very, very slowly,
Right.
if they move at all, and whereas tech companies move extremely fast. How fast electrons, move through wires,
Yeah.
so you could say they move at light speed, and uh, therefore, I believe that the only real protection humanity has against Google and whatever company comes after Google uh, is with monitoring systems. Monitoring systems are tech.
Right.
And so monitoring systems can keep up with new tech companies and new technologies. And monitoring systems will tell us if companies are basically messing with,
Right.
interfering with the free and fair election.
Dr. Epstein, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my
And
pleasure. Anytime.
It up, let's take it on. Jeff Bezos, he owns the Washington Post, also the founder of Amazon. Is Amazon a monopoly?
It is moving very rapidly to be a monopoly. And it's not just Amazon. I think we need vigorous antitrust legislation in this country. Because you are seeing, you name the area, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it is Wall Street, whether it is high tech, fewer and fewer gigantic corporations owning those sectors. And we need an attorney general, who I would appoint, who understands antitrust law, who believes in competition, who would break up these huge corporations.
So a Sanders administration would have a DOJ that would try to break up Amazon, break up Facebook, break up Google?
Absolutely. Facebook has we deal with it every day. They determine who we can communicate with. They have incredible power over the economy, over the political life of this country, in a very dangerous sense.
Was the FTC settlement with Facebook enough?
No, obviously it was not. All right, so these are my point, Bob, is these are the issues.
We're talking about them.
You're all right, good. Let me talk about them a little bit more.
thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Good night.